Hey guys, welcome back to another deck tech video. Today, I'm going to be leading you through my Miss Bumbleflower deck that I played on the newest episode of our Commander gameplay series where we were all playing decks from Bloomburrow. If you haven't seen that episode, you should go check it out. You can see it in action. We actually played 2 games in that episode. That's a first for our channel. And then make sure you're subscribed because the other guys are going to be doing deck techs as well, and you'll want to, check those out. Okay, so Miss Bumbleflower is for 1 green, a white, and a blue. It's a 1/5 rabbit citizen with vigilance. Whenever you cast a spell, target opponent draws a card. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains flying until end of turn. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, you draw 2 cards. So this is actually one of the face commanders of one of the precons, which I think is kind of funny because it's very wordy. This is actually a commander that's quite hard to keep track of in paper. However, while I wouldn't recommend it for like newer players, I really like this card. And the precon itself does have a little bit of a group hug element to it, but it is mostly just going in on like +1/+1 counters and stuff, and I took offense to that. I was like, no, we're gonna make this actually group hug for real. So this is actually loosely my Kenrith the Returned King deck that I've played before on the show. That's a group hug deck, but I have 2 less colors, so that opened up some room for a few Bloomburrow cards as well as a few cards that didn't make the cut in the original draft. With that said, that is one of, if not my favorite deck. So it is one of the decks that, while not every card is blinged out by any means, there are a lot of like cool extra pieces like this Bob Ross Evolving Wilds, this Secret Lair Nature's Lore, this Growth Spiral signed by Brewer's Kitchen. Like, there are just cool things in this deck, and when relevant, I will make sure that those are the versions I have on screen, but we won't be able to see every single example of that. All right, so since it was a gameplay for Bloomburrow, let's go ahead and start off with the few Bloomburrow cards I had in here, which unfortunately wasn't a lot, but I really like all 4 of these. First of all, Tempt with Bunnies. This is a card that is so cool. It's for sure going in the updated version of my actual deck. This is for 2 and a white, a sorcery with Tempting Offer. Draw a card and create a 1/1 rabbit creature token. Then each opponent may draw a card and create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token. For each opponent who does, you draw a card and create another rabbit token. I really like the Tempting Offer cards. I have a couple of other ones in this deck. It just adds a fun element to the game, so I really like these, and I'm actually going to add this to another one of my decks as well. That's not even group hug, it's fun value and it's a fun card. All right, next up we have Perch Protection. This is for 4 white, an instant with gift an extra turn, meaning you may promise an opponent the gift of an extra turn that they will get after the rest of the spell resolves. You create 4 2/2 bird creature tokens with flying, and then if it was promised, all permanents you control phase out until your next turn. Your life total can't change, and you gain protection from everything, and then you exile Perch Protection. So most notably, this is very similar to Teferi's Protection. It is twice the mana, so it's a lot harder to keep up 6 mana than it is to keep up 3 mana, but you are adding a lot of extra power to the board while you are doing it. So even though you're gifting an opponent an extra turn, you're hoping that they are going to use that extra turn to kill off one of your other opponents, and then you're going to come back and hopefully be safe. All right, next up we have Starfall Invocation. I actually got to cast this in the episode, and I was very impressed with it, so it is also probably going to go in my normal version of the deck. This is for 3 white, a sorcery with gift a card. So, you can give an opponent a card when you cast it. Destroy all creatures, and then if the gift was promised, return a creature card put into your graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. So it's just a good way to make sure that you're going to get your best creature back after wrathing. My main complaint with board wipes is that often your opponents are going to get to build back before you do. This is a really good way to make sure that's just not going to happen. So I actually really like this one. In gifting a card, really not that much of a downside in Commander at all. Yeah, it plays well in group hug, right? But I think in general, you can always just pick the opponent who's far behind, pick the opponent who doesn't really have any cards in here, pick the opponent who has the weakest deck, whatever it may be. I feel like gifting a card is usually going to come out in your favor. Speaking of gifting a card, the last new Bloomburrow card I had in here was Long River's Pull, which is for blue, gift a card, counter target creature spell. If the gift was promised, it said counter target spell. It's just important to have some counter matching in here. I only have a couple counter spells in this deck. I thought it would be nice to have one more, and the gifting a card makes it a little bit less of a feel bad in that sense. All right, so heading into the meat and potatoes of this deck, the 2 main things that I am doing with this is helping my opponents draw cards and get extra mana. I'm going to go through these really quick, but here's a handful of those cards that are going to draw or ramp my opponents that are in the normal version of my deck and also ended up in this version. So we have Horn of Greed, which is a 3-mana artifact. Whenever a player plays a land, that player draws a card. Quain, which is a 2-mana 1/3 that says tap, each player may draw a card, then each player who drew a card this way gains 1 life. We have Dictate a Crufix, which is a 3-mana enchantment with flash that at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Wedding Ring, which is a 4-mana artifact that when it enters, if it was cast, target opponent creates a token that's a copy of it. And whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring draws a card during their turn, you draw a card. Whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring gains life during their turn, you gain that much life. And then we also have Kami of the Crescent Moon, which is a 2-mana 1/3 at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Howling Mine, 2-mana artifact that says the same thing as long as it's untapped. Tempt with Discovery is a for 3 and a green sorcery, another tempting offer card. Search your library for a land card to put onto the battlefield. Each opponent may do the same, and then you get to do it again for each opponent who does. Notably, that's any land, so you can grab all your cool utility lands and stuff. Rites of Flourishing, 3-mana enchantment at the beginning of each player's draw step. That player draws an additional card, and then each player may play an additional land on each of their turns. So that's actually helping both with ramp and card draw. We also have Yes Man, Personal Securitron, which is 2 and a white 2/2. Tap it, target opponent gains control of it, and when they do, you draw 2 cards and put a quest counter on it. So it's kind of like a Humble Defector kind of card, except that when it leaves the battlefield, its owner creates a tapped 1/1 soldier token for each quest counter that is on it. So this is actually better than Humble Defector because it's also going to give you some bodies on the board. Then we have Generous Patron, which is a really cool one for 3 mana 1/4. Enters the battlefield, support 2, meaning you can put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. And whenever you put 1 or more counters on a creature you don't control, draw a card, which combos really well with Miss Bumbleflower. Usually you're just going to put the counters on your own creatures just to help have a little bit extra protection, but it's nice to have the option to draw some extra cards, buff up your opponent's creatures, stuff like that. And we also have Everybody Lives, which is for 2 mana instant that says all creatures gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Players gain hexproof until end of turn, and players can't lose life this turn, and players can't lose or win the game this turn. So this is kind of a 2 mana, hang on, the game's not ending right now, which is especially important when we had Steven in this episode where he comboed off, and we needed to make sure that wasn't going to happen again. All right, so here's a few cards that got added to this version of the deck that weren't in the original. So we have Bucknard's Everfull Purse, which is a 2 mana artifact. You can pay 1, tap it, roll a d4, and create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. Then the player to your right gains control of it. Then we also have Master of Ceremonies, 4 mana 3/4. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent chooses money, friends, or secrets. For each player who chose money, you and that player each create a treasure token. For each player who chose friends, you and that player each create a 1/1. And for each player who chose secrets, you and that player each draw a card. Very flexible, gives your opponents what they need in that moment. We also have Savala Explorer Return, which is a 3-mana 2/4 with Parlay. Tap it, each player reveals the top card of their library. For each non-land card revealed this way, you add a green mana and gain 1 life. Then each player draws a card. And then we have Questing Feldergriff, 4 mana 4/4 with 3 abilities. You can pay a green to give it +1/+1 until end of turn. Target opponent creates a 1/1 hippo. You can pay a white to give it protection from black and red this turn. Target opponent gains 2 life. Or you can pay a blue to give it flying until end of turn. Target opponent may draw a card. Which this card is actually, unfortunately, one of the win cons in the deck, which is very jankety. Finally, 2 other cards that didn't make the final cut, but I've kind of come around on. I think I'm going to put them in my normal version of the deck. Are both green ramp enchantments. Eladamri's Vineyard is a 1 mana enchantment that says at the beginning of each player's pre-combat main phase, that player adds 2 green mana. And Heartbeat of Spring, which is a 3 mana enchantment. Whenever a player taps a land for mana, that player adds 1 mana of any type that land produces. Just going to make sure that you and your opponents have extra mana. Now, this deck is also, while group huggy, yes, you have to have answers. You need to make sure that you're keeping the playing field level. You need to have answers for things that are problematic. So like Long River's Pull, we also have Arcane Denial, which is a 2 mana counter spell, but it's going to draw you and that player some cards, so the feel bad is less of a problem. Similarly, we have removal like Generous Gift, Fractured Identity, which is going to give people things back. Fractured Identity is the much scarier card, but it's a really fun card, so felt like it had to be in here. And then also like Starfall Invocation, we have some less feel baddy board wipes. So we have Depopulate and Tragic Arrogance. Depopulate will let each player who had a multicolored creature draw a card before you board wipe. And then Tragic Arrogance, for each player you choose from among the permanents that player controls, an artifact, a creature, enchantment, and a planeswalker Planeswalker, then each player sacrifices all other non-land permanents they control. So the main problem with Group Hug is that it's very hard to find your win cons. How do you actually win the game? Or are you just here to create chaos? Well, that's actually the answer. You're actually here just for fun. You're just here to help the other players pop off, do a little bit of politicking, have a good time. You don't really care if you win. But we do actually have 2 win cons in the deck outside of the Questing Veldegriff. The way you win, just make your opponent run out of cards. Mill them out, baby. We have Folio of Fancies, which is a 2-mana artifact that the reason it's in here is that players have no maximum hand size, and you can pay X tap it to make each player draw X cards. But a relevant line of text is that you can pay 2 and a blue and tap it to make each opponent mill cards equal to the number of cards in their hand. And then similarly, we have Forced Fruition, which is a 6-mana enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, that player draws 7 cards. So yeah, these are group huggy cards. They're risky. You're giving your opponent a lot of extra value. However, they are so explosive that they can just end the game, especially once you get to the later stages of the game. And then I'm also going to highlight a few cards in the land slots. We have Sea of Clouds and Bountiful Promenade. I actually don't really like playing the Battle Bond lands outside of 2-color decks, but because we're a group hug deck, we're going to be keeping our opponents alive. I felt like they were less sketchy to run in a 3-color deck. Tranquil Landscape, nothing really special or on theme about this land, but the landscape cycle is new. They just came out in Modern Horizons 3. I feel like people aren't really paying attention to them. I think you should be playing these in all of your 3-color decks. You should be checking them out. And then as far as on theme lands, we have Forbidden Orchard, which is a land that taps for any color, but when we do, we have to give one of our opponents a 1/1 spirit creature token. Notably, that spirit doesn't have flying, but we are giving our opponents creatures that they could be attacking and blocking with or whatever. And then we have 2 similar lands. We have Gyreach Sanitarium and Makokoro Center of the Sea. Both are legendary lands that tap for colorless and have an activated ability where we can pay 2 and tap them. Gyreach Sanitarium says each player draws a card, then discards a card, and then Makokoro says each player draws a card, just to give all players a little bit of extra card advantage. Especially in the late game, we can be dumping our extra mana into this, and we have Seedborn Muse in the deck, so we can also be doing it every single turn if we don't have any instants to do, if we don't have anything better to do in response, whatever. Then finally, we have Field of Ruin, which is a land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap it, sacrifice it, destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. Then each player searches their library for a basic to put onto the battlefield, then shuffles. This is debatably the worst of these kind of lands. The reason it's the worst one is because it says each player gets to find a basic, not just you and the player who went down the land, but the other 2 players are now going to go up a land. However, that's why it's actually good in group hug, is you're actually ramping the other 2 players while you and the opponent whose land you blew up, you guys are just net positive. So it's actually kind of funny as a group hug card. All right, and then that is it. That is my Miss Bumbleflower deck that I played on our show, as well as also giving you a little bit of information about my 5-color Kenrith group hug / politics deck that you can check out in, I believe, episode 7 of our gameplay show if you would like to see that deck as well. I know that this is probably not going to be the normal way to build this Bumbleflower. You probably are going to go more into playing with +1/+1 counters, or going to have some kind of off way to offset the cards that you're drawing your opponents. However, it's a really cool card, and there's a couple of different ways you can play it. So let me know what you think in the comments down below, and then make sure you're subscribed so that you can check out the other guys' deck techs when those are going to be coming out over the next couple of weeks. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys later. Bye.